What stood out for you tonight?
The adolescent expectation. I truly, I mean, I had no clue that and he states the ages here, but how about 78?
How about
I mean,
that?
that's kind of pathetic, but it's true. It's like until I started working with you and Herb K, I just and and Tom and Tom and everybody else, it's just it is it's absolutely preposterous to me that I was stuck in such an adolescent expectation of people, places, things,
Yes.
circumstances, everything. It's just astounding. It's
No,
embarrassing.
no, well, I share the same thing.
God.
When we wake up to this and start to see it, see, one of these things, it is so obvious, and yet it's so difficult at times to see the obvious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what this is, because I was upset. I get upset about people, places, and things all the time.
Oh,
But I had no idea. I could not connect it to this lack of emotional maturity or a lack of emotional sobriety. Never,
yeah, me neither. I didn't get the connection
I
at
was
all.
convinced that they were all wrong,
Of
that things
course.
are supposed to be my way. I mean, Harry Tebow calls it our infantile grandiosity persists into adulthood. It's so true. I mean, it is such an arrested development, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm glad we can see it and put a smile on our face. See,
Right.
instead of beating ourselves up, and I want to make this point over and over again. It's a developmental issue. It's not pathological. It's we failed to continue to mature along the lines that we would have had the conditions been other than they were in our life. And I include the conditions being other than they were in our life, our cultural influences. It's an all about me culture. It's a culture so focused on materialism, the dynamics in our family, how mature our parents were, their level of differentiation or the highest level they achieved, which is not much in this culture. Very, very rarely do people achieve a differentiation level higher than, let's say, 50. Let's say the scale is 0 to 100. 100, you really got your stuff together. People in this culture rarely get up to 50. I mean, it's not a culture based on wisdom, as Richard Rohr likes to say. It's not a culture based on wisdom. So, all those things going into factors, of course, we came to our immaturity honestly. It's the way I like to think about it. We came to it, there weren't any other options, but now there are. See, that's the good news. It's more about what you do now than what we didn't do before. See, recovery happens in this moment right now. This is where you gain insight. This is where you start to learn how to be the determining force in your own life, where you how to have a more honest and aligned experience with reality. I mean, all of that stuff is what needs to go on now, not what we could have done or should have done or would have liked to have done, but it's what we need to do today. And that's what we're doing here. I will confess, so I've had my left big toe fused today. They opened up my foot. They moved a joint apart. I had severe arthritis in there. They cleaned it out, put the toe back together, threw a plate on top, put some screws in, sewed me back up, and here I am with you right now. That happened this morning. And so I may have asked Herb or Tom to share tonight, but I have not checked in with them. In fact, I have not too much memory about what happened prior to tonight because of the anesthesia. And I'm still feeling that anesthesia pretty good right now. So thank God, because my toe is not hurting. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to address the issue of forgiveness and trauma. We talk about special situations, special special considerations need to be given to certain experiences in life. Um, we realize that with the vets coming back from Vietnam in terms of post-traumatic stress disorder and all the subsequent combat. And even before that, they used to call it combat fatigue. But now we realize is that that needs to be addressed in a very, very specific way. And thankfully, a lot of people stepped forward and started to figure so much out about how to meet these vets in the way that could help them start to heal the trauma. War is a horrible, horrible experience. And when you're involved in taking another person's life that you really have no personal issue with, and especially in the case of a war like Vietnam, it leaves a big scar. And I'll say that personally. I was
Hmm.
involved in that war, and I was involved taking the life of another person. And I've had a lot of regret over that through the years. It's really changed me, especially thinking
Hmm.
back. I was 18 years old, 18 when I did that. That left a big scar. There's many times I wondered about his father and his mother or if he was a father himself and his children. And um, it's haunted me my whole life. Now, I feel very blessed that I'll just share this before I dig into this topic. In 2011, so 40 years, 41 years after I was in Vietnam, I was there from 1970 to 71. So 40 years after I was in Vietnam, I was invited to be one of four men invited to be a delegation to Vietnam called the Gift of Recovery. And I flew over to back when I was in Vietnam, it was Hanoi. It's now called Ho Chi Minh City, the capital of Vietnam, North Vietnam. And for 2 weeks,
Hanoi is the capital of North Vietnam.
and
This
for 2 weeks, I lectured with my fellow colleagues on recovery. And at that point in time, and still is true, the major source of recovery in Vietnam was methadone maintenance to help them get off heroin because heroin was a serious problem. And how we got involved over there is George Bush got involved to try to stop the spread of AIDS because they were sharing needles. And so AIDS was just going, I'm rampant, running rampant in Vietnam. So they said, if we can help these people with their problem, maybe we can stop needle use and or sharing needles and have an impact on the spread of AIDS in Vietnam and in the world in general. So they wanted, SAMHSA wanted to also give some experience with recovery other than what's called medically assisted treatment, right? Recovery based on, let's say, the 12 steps or other approaches that are not dependent on a biological intervention. Very interesting. So I was tasked with presenting the therapeutic value of the 12 steps to talk
Hmm.
about addiction and
That's
therapeutic value.
great.
Somebody is not muted. Tom, can you find out who that is and mute them while I'm talking?
Oh,
Uh,
it's your buddy Tom.
so, um, so it was peculiar because I had to submit all of my PowerPoints because it's a communist country. I had to submit it to their censor committee, and they would not allow me to present the 12 steps to the Vietnam people because the 12 steps had the word God, God in it. There is no God in Vietnam. So they said, Dr. Berger, you're going to have to modify this in some way because there's only one ultimate authority in Vietnam, that's Communist Party. So I said, okay, how about if I say higher power? Couldn't say higher power either. Higher power was the Communist Party. Eventually, I had to modify it and say higher self. And then I was allowed to do my presentations. But I'll tell you, in that moment, being censored like that gave me even more appreciation of this incredible country that we live in and the degree of freedom that we have here, freedom of speech. It's pretty remarkable that we can get up and share anything that we want to talk about, given that it's not going to have a terrible effect on some other person. So, um, so that was a journey. So I got to go and start to teach, right? I started with a group of about 500 medical students up in Ho Chi Minh City. And I decided this was my opportunity to make amends and ask for forgiveness. And so at the end of my talk, I said, before I leave this stage, I wanted to say to you, I'm sorry for what I did to this country and the fact that I participated in the destruction and the death of some of your citizens. I am forever, forever sorry for that, and am here to try to make a difference and give something back since I took so much away. And I said that with tears in my eyes. It was very sincere. Afterwards, about 100 students got in line to come up and talk to me. And they all came up and said, "Thank you, Dr. Berger, because you helped me find peace for losing my father during the war, my mother. Is that your amends helped me find a way to now forgive you guys for that whole situation that happened." It was a remarkable experience. Remarkable experience. Now, what's different about forgiveness when a trauma is involved? And you could hear it in the piece of work I read to you that I did with that woman, Victoria, and what happened in the Pinto and how she had to work through feelings, right? And that's a trauma that occurred in her adulthood. And tonight I want to focus more on a trauma that occurred in our childhood. I want to talk about the difference between that and when we're an adult, right? What is the difference? How does the trauma, how is the trauma different in its nature, in its texture, in its dynamics, right? In terms of how it operates within us. So give me 1 second. I want to remind myself of something. So first thing that we have to understand is that when we are exposed to what Alice Miller, brilliant psychoanalyst, and she did a lot of work on childhood trauma and what she called poisonous pedagogy. They use the word pedagogue in Europe to talk about child rearing. And she was talking about child rearing that is toxic or poisonous to a child. Well, when a child is exposed to this great threat to their existence, and that's what it is, either through verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual molestation, or whatever it is, that what happens is the child has to suppress that experience in order to survive. So they've got to push it away, because if not, they couldn't function with the intensity of the anxiety and pain that they would experience from being so damaged. Alice Miller describes it as a self-renunciation. Think about that for a minute. The child has to renounce themselves. They have to cut off, and we do this anyway later on in life for reasons to be loved and accepted. But this is what they call a fawning response. The child has to do this in order to survive in that situation. Now, you guys have heard me say before that Kurt Goldstein made this incredible observation in the 30s that we all have a tendency to actualize whatever is possible given that situation. And to actualize what's possible means to try to ensure our existence to whatever degree we can. So to cut off parts of myself in order to survive is the only strategy that's available to us if we're in a situation where we're traumatized as a child. One of the greatest casualties of that trauma is a child's exuberance. One of the greatest casualties of that trauma is a child's exuberance. In fact, in all the child abuse training I've had, one of the symptoms is a child that seems to be not excited about their life, listless about life, uninterested, resigned, withdrawn. Our very life is stolen from us with abuse. The excitement about life, curiosity about life. the wonder of life, the awe that we have in this remarkable experience we're all having. That gets cut off. So what Alice Miller says, it becomes a foregone conclusion for the child which feelings are good and valuable for the child and which are not. And guess which ones we are going to get incorporated into the child's personality? The ones that are good and valuable. The ones that are not are going to be disowned. We're going to be disconnected from them. We're going to become fragmented. We're going to become torn into pieces. She goes on to say, exuberance is one of those feelings for the child that are not good. You cannot be alive in that situation and be okay. You must desensitize yourself or it's impossible. So what do you do if you're a child like that? How do you get to forgiveness in this thing? Well, you definitely cannot use a spiritual bypass, as we talked about. It doesn't work to just say, okay, I'll forgive them. They were a sick person, and I can now understand that they were probably abused in their childhood. All of that stuff is relevant. I'm not saying it's not. And all of that stuff at some point in time can play an important role in forgiveness, but not in the beginning. Listen to what she says. Genuine forgiveness for the person who has been abused as a child does not deny anger, but faces it head on. If I can feel the outrage at the injustice I have suffered, if I can recognize my persecution as such, and if I can acknowledge and even allow myself to hate my persecutor for what he or she has done to me, only then the way to forgiveness begins to open up for me. And I've seen this in all the trauma work I've done, and especially I've done a lot of trauma work with Roger. And as you know, I've got a 3-day trauma intensive coming up here in a couple weeks. It's that paradoxical theory of change. It's the same idea about why when we admit we're powerless, all of a sudden we find a power. If I say, I will never forgive you, what you did is a terrible injustice, I'll never forgive you for it. At that moment, a small possibility of forgiveness begins to emerge. She goes, only if the history of the abuse in earliest childhood can be uncovered will the repressed anger, rage, and hatred cease to be perpetuated. Instead, once those feelings come up, they will be transformed into sorrow and pain that things had to be that way. As a result of this pain, they will give way to genuine understanding, the understanding of an adult who has now gained insight into his or her parents' childhood and finally liberated from his or her own hatred. Only then can the child experience mature empathy. Now, if you've heard Herb talk before, is one of the great insights from Sigmund Freud was that we have to take what was placed in the unconscious and emerge it into our consciousness in order to resolve the issues. Well, why is that? Taking the unconscious and bringing it more conscious. Now, remember, the forces that suppress that are going to resist that like crazy. We talked about that last time. Resistance is a part of dealing with that, is a part of getting to forgiveness. There's no question about it. Because we don't want to feel that. We don't want to feel that. We don't want to feel that threat to our existence. We don't want to feel that pain. Understandably so. But this is what really helps us understand it. You see, what is put in your unconscious as a child is atemporal. It doesn't change with time. And that's why that experience has to be brought into your adult consciousness so that who you are today can digest that experience. You see, our digestive tract is just a wonderful, I think, metaphor for what it takes to take an experience and process it and grow from it. Because when you eat food, or if I took a bite of an apple, that apple starts as not Alan. That's an apple. And I put it in my mouth and I chew it up with my teeth and I start to bring it all together. And then my body starts adding enzymes to break it down and help me process that food. I swallow it in my esophagus, it goes into my stomach. And in my stomach, the pancreas, right, starts to secrete bile, other chemicals and stuff. And then my stomach starts to twist and turn this into kind of this mush that's going to be passed into my intestinal tract. And my large intestines and small intestines will start extracting from it everything I need. Protein, vitamins, fluid. What I don't need will be passed and I will get rid of. I will either defecate or urinate the waste. My body takes what it needs. At some point in time, you can no longer say that's an apple. That apple has become Alan. It's no longer foreign to me. And that's what happens when you chew up and do exactly what Alice is talking about with an experience you've had in your life. And that's why Ernie Larson described this stage of recovery, of dealing with some of these childhood issues that end up surfacing in our recovery, as stage 3 recovery. Herb and I include that stage 3 recovery into emotional sobriety. We even think there's a stage 4 recovery, actually, that we've talked about. But the point that I make here is that when these things start to surface, there's going to be a natural tendency to avoid them and not go towards them. And it takes a real courage and curiosity to really start to dig into this stuff and face them. Because for those of us that are trying to be free of unreasonable expectations, until some of this stuff is resolved, we are still going to have this unconscious fantasy that the future will reverse the experiences we had in our childhood. And we will then now, because we have this fantasy, we will treat the present as though it's the past. And when you work through it, the present becomes the present, the past becomes the past. You differentiate your experience from then and now, and you're able to now have an honest relationship with reality today. Well, that was a mouthful. This is what Virginia Satir says. Life is what it is. It's not what it's supposed to be. It is what it is. The way you cope with it is what makes the difference. So let me invite my two colleagues in and have them make some comments on this, and then we'll go forward.
Hey, where am I?
Hi, my name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks, Alan. And you did actually say, as my memory serves me, that you would be doing a supplement tonight on your comments from last week. And I don't think anything else was decided. Um, and again, just here's where the combination of psychology and spirituality meet. I mean, headlong.
Yes.
And yeah, it's it's like you can't do the work of spirituality if the psychology is bent or corrupt or in some way malaligned. And I was just thinking of my own history of course, of therapy and reflection and attempting to be better and doing some step work. And it was I'm sure all of it important to bring some level of progressive consciousness, but it was over a period of time when I had done some therapy, some serious therapy. And then I met a man who gave me some serious step work, but it was progressive at the same time. The first exposure I had to real resentments, which I didn't even know I had until I was like 48, 50 years old, 5 years sober. It was embarrassing to see of the level of volcanic red hot rage that I had toward my father. And what I saw,
Herb, did that happen in LifeSpring? Is that where you experienced that, or was that prior?
partly in Life Springs, and that was a self-help program that kind of opened it up a little bit before I was in therapy and before I was in program even.
'Cause I remember that. See, to
I
me,
had forgotten. Yeah,
that was when that trauma was starting to introduce itself into your life. You didn't know it. You could not have articulated I mean, you didn't have the vocabulary or really the consciousness that you have now to describe it. But I remember vividly you talking to me about what happened at LifeSpring.
yeah,
To me, it was the beginning of this thing starting. It's what does Ernie Larson call it? The bone chip that starts to work its way to the surface
yeah,
and breaks free.
yeah.
And it drove you to LifeSpring.
Yes, yeah, right. Yeah. Father Keating in Centering Prayer Contemplation calls it the evacuation of the unconscious.
There it is.
At
You
some point,
knew you needed it. You knew you needed it.
at some knowing level that I was not even conscious of. And the first work I did on resentments allowed me to see the motives that I had today for holding it, which I saw were corrupt motives. And that began to open it up a little bit. I made amends at the gravesite, and there was some freedom, but the lava flow was still there. And I didn't know it until 3 years later when I did the work again, and another man helped me with column 3 in the resentment inventory, where I saw my beliefs at a level that I had never even had a peek at. And it was so embarrassing, but of course therapeutic because it really opened me up to the truth. And I see that as really just good psychology. That's not
And
spirituality.
that what you just described, and I hadn't realized the evolution. That made you now ready for the message of emotional sobriety. Because
Yeah,
you see what I mean? It's like if you didn't have that foundation and that awareness of what was going on with the resentments, and like you just said, the motive, what was driving it, it's all about me stuff, right? If you didn't have that awareness, you wouldn't have been able to understand the impact of expectations.
it was very slow, very progressive, literally an awakening, but it took years and it took many different teachers and many different exercises to come to sort of this place. Then at that time, the man showed me a spiritual practice in the big book about praying for your own healing,
Yeah.
for your own exorcism,
Your
praying
own
for
humanity.
praying for the removal of the small cancer, big cancer in me taking responsibility to make a decision to release it, knowing that I can't and that I needed power. And there's where I think the merger or the integration of spirituality and psychology came together. I can take it. I can take it to the goal line. I just can't cross the goal line.
Well, that's grace right there. Is what we talk about is grace. And that's what she says. He says something happens, something moves you. It's not you. There is
Yeah.
a force inside of you. We've called that our holiness,
Yeah.
moving towards becoming whole.
Yeah.
That's the grace. You're just carried over that. I love how you said that. I hadn't thought about this part, but at that moment is when that holiness, the desire for becoming whole, carries you the rest of the way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So Like-
I love how we connect this stuff though. When we talk like this, like
Yeah.
even your history, it made a whole different sense to me to see. And now go back to the developmental stages we talked about.
Right.
Can you see in what Herb said, his developmental stages, right? Even before he came to the program, in some way we could call it pre-contemplation, right? It was like he was getting ready for his journey and he didn't even know it.
Right.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
I love that we're doing a workshop this Saturday. I'm so excited about it. And people look in the link because we're going to have a great one. We're going to be talking about the 11th step. And I think it's going to be a powerful, powerful day. All right, Tom. Tag, you're it.
Okay. I don't have a lot to add here because first of all, I've had a difficult day, so I'm not real tuned into my own thoughts about this. But I'd always want to take the opportunity when we're talking about this stuff just to echo again what I really believe, and I think that I don't, and I want people to get it because if self-forgiveness in all of this is the primary issue. It's like if I work with too many people who basically get into therapy and they feel sometimes from actual other people, religious people or family people, that kind of stuff, or just sometimes within their own little should monsters inside, that they have to especially perpetrators, but mainly parents, they have to forgive their parents in order to be okay. And I just want people to know it is not necessary. You do not have to do that. And when you do it, it will happen naturally. It's like anything you're forcing. As soon as you force forgiveness on somebody, it becomes abusive. So my experience has been with myself, with lots of other people, is that forgiveness is a natural thing. It's our state of being, which you're talking about, being clear of our demons and being clear of the stuff that used the exorcism word that Herb was talking about. And if we keep doing our work, we'll get to that place. And it's just like, I want people to know that, if you beware of should messages around forgiveness. So that's what I got.
Great. I love that message. I can't hear it enough, man. It's so true. That's a big part of this. Is, we talk about that, is that it's very hard for me to forgive the mistakes and misgivings in others if I haven't learned to do that for myself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, how can I give you something I don't have?
Well, and the thing I don't know that I knew this even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but it's like that, and I'm not saying there's not something, I mean, we might become aware that we need to do something, or this will do some work here, but it's like a significant amount of the additional forgiveness that I'll just speak for myself, that occurred to me as I've gotten older is I've felt it happen as opposed to made it happen in me because of the work that I've done and because of the self-compassion that I practice, and because there was definitely a time, and I think people will identify with this. There's definitely a time in my life where the idea of I'm even chuckling when I think about it, when the idea of self-forgiveness was laughable. It's like, oh yeah, I'll get right on that. I mean, make a note. It's like, and so that was such an amazing, in ways, some long term trip, but it really is. Yeah, and I'm not sure I even have the words to describe that, but I just keep going back to the word nature or natural, the idea of that keep moving in ways that, and I go to the 12 steps, keep doing the next right thing, keep doing what shows up, keep working with what's in front of you. If something is an obstacle, and let's look at it and see what we have to do that. And what you're gonna find that basically the need for holding on to, for one thing, the need to holding on for resentment or anger to protect ourselves it goes away when when we're taking care of ourselves. When we, when and certainly with emotional sobriety, what we're learning is, I'm not sure who said it, where I quote this from, but the idea that it may be Brandon, but it's like the most important reputation you have is the reputation you have with yourself, and
That's what Daniel Kahneman-
yeah, it's so powerful, and I remember that so often, and it's like, and it's so counter what we have grown
Yeah.
up learning in this in this
Well,
world.
to tell you the truth, I didn't want to know what reputation I had with myself because it was so
Well,
bad.
no, well, I just, yeah, like I said, I thought it was laughable to think about self-forgiveness, but it's like,
That's
but
right.
when
About
you,
your reputation with
I
yourself.
mean, that people may not even recognize it, but we really have grown up in a world that we're until we change it, until we actually consciously change it, we are evaluating ourselves at least to a significant degree on what we think how other people see us, and that doesn't get us anywhere.
Well, you're right. And see, that is the thing. I think, didn't we, you said it last time, Herb, I think, but it's something that I've heard a lot too, is even Fritz Perl said it. A rock doesn't want to become a tree. It's a rock.
Right.
I'm just hang out here as a rock. Human species, because of our self-consciousness, right, is the only species that thinks that it would be better off being something it's not.
Yeah.
Which is, think about that. That is a heavy duty issue, curse in our life that
Right.
needs to be dealt with in some way. We say that self-acceptance is such a critical part,
Right.
of recovery, of well-being,
Yeah.
of emotional sobriety.
Well, one of my favorite jokes is that the idea that we hate change, and we're scared shitless of uncertainty, and the only thing certain about life is change. So we're the only species that actually lives in fear of our actual nature. I mean, that's us with our big brains, that's uh it's like, I got my dog over here. He doesn't worry about this. He's okay. It's like,
That's right.
yeah, I mean, it's just like, and I won't even talk about my cats because they're just sociopaths, and I don't need to get into that,
Well, I
yeah,
hope
but
you.
no, it has so much to do with self-acceptance. I mean, it's a simple way of saying it, but so much of this stuff comes down to that, and so much of emotional sobriety is about self-acceptance. Yeah.
Well, let's invite Tom in, and we might have a few minutes to have a few people share what this means for them tonight, or if you have a question.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation, guys. Excuse me. I'm coming through the tail end of bad head cold, so I'm gonna keep my comments to a minimum and maybe share one of the subsequent weeks. But just to say, like, I've had the opportunity to make all of those mistakes about how to, be able to forgive, the spiritual bypass, and then turn around and, pretend I'm a spiritual guy because I forgave you first.
Yeah.
Spiritual arrogance at work. It's like, I'm the better man. I forgave you. It didn't get me very far until I, did the work and came at it genuinely. So we do.
One of the things that just is so frustrating, though, given my own experience in these conversations, is how slow the process is, how just goddamn slow all of this is. And most people just are suffering because they don't know any better. And even when they get a little information about the possibility of a solution, somehow they're not motivated to actually take the actions long term that will. And it's like, oh my, I mean, Dr. Berger, would you create a pill, please?
I know, right? And look, the thing is probably a lot of us would want to take it, but I don't know if you could ever get the richness of it. You know, it's there is.
I'll bypass the richness for the
You make it
results.
sound so good.
You know, it's so funny because you know one of the
Give me
things
the give me the
It's like-
pill. Give me the pill.
Karen Horney says, we don't want to climb up the mountain. We'd like to start at this top.
Brings a helicopter. Brings a helicopter.
Just get us to the top of the mountain. Just get us to the top of the mountain. But you know, it is interesting because I think there's two things that happen. That glacial speed of movement, right? Is I've experienced that. But then there's it almost like it hits a patch where it now spins out of control, right? And you're moving faster than you want to be moving. And then all of a sudden you hit the glacial thing again. And maybe that's the process of integration. See, maybe what's happening when we're moving slow like that, right? That we're putting things together and getting ready for that next growth spurt. It's a possibility because you see it in kids, right? You see a kid when they hit a certain age, or all of a sudden they get these pains in their body, right? In their bones. And what it is their bones are getting ready to do some growth, right? And it's preparing the child for that movement. I got a hunch we go through something similar to that spiritually, psychologically, in terms of our own development.
The philosopher.
Well, your bones hurt a lot lately, Alan, and it's not because you're
Not
growing.
yet. I know it's
The philosophers use three words for this integration process, as I understand it: thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And that seems to be the dynamic.
yes. I
Yeah.
like say that again. Say it again. I like that.
Theses, not feces. Theses, theses, antithesis, and synthesis.
Oh, that's the process.
Good.
You see what happened? Oh, I love it because that's the digestion.
Yeah.
If you think about that, that's the digestive movement I was talking about, right? Starts out, you break it down, you work with it, and then you integrate it. That integration, and we're going to talk a lot about that as we move further into this thing, is so important.
Yeah, I was talking, Alan, with you once. We were talking about how, emotional sobriety has a degree of maturity to it. It's almost like I have to go through these life events. I have to chew on this stuff for long periods of time until it becomes synthesized. I would like the quicker version, but
Yeah.
there's the richness, use the word richness of the journey. Like, I don't know if I'd give that up.
Well, that is part of the dynamic or the explanation for addiction. When you said, I want to hurry the process up. Absolutely.
That's
What
right.
alcohol does. That's what
the quick
drugs does.
solution. Yeah.
Timothy Leary said that's what LSD did. Yeah, exactly.
Hi, thanks for listening. It's been great to listen to your discussion on forgiveness. I'm in a real emotional life crisis and rock bottom around forgiveness. I've recently separated from my partner, and the ways in which I went about things was not in alignment with the way that I want to live my life, and I don't feel it was the right thing that I did at the time, unfortunately. And I have this huge level of self-hatred to myself, anger. I even went and saw my priest the other day and did a full confession, and they did a prayer of forgiveness over me. But the problem is I'm struggling to forgive myself, and it's something that's eating at me all the time because it's it's cost me the love of my life, and it cost me a baby, and it's cost me so much. And yeah, and I was just hoping maybe you could give me some I don't know, advice around it, and how to try my sobriety into this, because I stay as connected to God as I can. I ask him for forgiveness on a daily basis and to forgive myself, but I'm struggling with it.
I hear you, man. So first of all, I just want to recognize your pain and courage to come and share it with us. You're not alone. I've been there. I think everybody in this room has hated themselves terribly for something that they've done and some act that they feel cost them dearly in life. Um, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me, Adam, is grieving the loss. And you see, when you hate yourself over this thing, you're preventing the grief from taking place. And the path towards integration now is more about lost, also including what you've lost about your idea of yourself. You see, you're coming to face with something about yourself that you haven't seen up to now, or else you would have addressed this more. And so you've lost a certain impression of yourself, an idea of yourself that is worth losing because it was incomplete. You see, it didn't embrace all of who you are. And until we own all of who we are, there's nothing we can do to change it. Self-acceptance, no matter how difficult that may be and how hard it is to look at certain parts of ourselves and not wanting to see those things, that's the prerequisite to change, man. So you're right at the door of an important experience for you. But you're going to keep the door closed if you keep beating yourself up and don't start crying over the lost image you have. You are not who you thought you are. And I will say this to you, you're also not what you did. You're much more than that. But you can't discover that until you start facing this.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't stopped crying for 5 months every day.
Yeah, no, man, because you're so focused on beating yourself up over this thing, and which is preventing you from get to the next step of digesting the experience and learning from it. Right? Is really getting into here and see what that means, see what's missing in you. Right? You've heard Herb and I say this before. The first experience we have, I'm a mistake. Look at what I've done. And we've got to convert that to, I made a mistake. I'm not a mistake. I made a serious mistake here. And there's a reason for that. That doesn't excuse it. That doesn't whitewash me. That doesn't abdicate me of my responsibility for taking responsibility for those people I've harmed. But what it does do, it opens the door to facing that and seeing what that means about my life today, about who I am today. And see, so it's so important, man, that you put that aside. The part of you tell him, hey, back off, buddy. You're preventing me from growing up. And if I lose this, a lot of things in here, the one thing I don't want to lose is the wisdom that's available. So you back him off. No more beating yourself up, Adam. If you do, I'll have to come over there and kick your ass. I don't mean that. I don't think I could. I'm too old any goddamn way, and I got a bad leg. So I'm not.
You're not kicking anything with that toe.
I'm not kicking anything with that toe. No way. But you understand what I mean. Time to let it go, man. Time now to start to do the real work. That hasn't been the real work. You've been caught in that self-pity, and that's what that's all about. And now time is to integrate this and to move forward. Does that help?
And you're doing it, man. Because I mean, how big a deal, all of us, everybody here, think about it. Well, how big a deal is it that you show up at a place like this and you say what is going, I mean, you're on, that's it. I mean, you're doing the next right thing. It's beautiful. And so one of the things you can do, give yourself credit where credit is due. This is a big deal.
That's who you
Come
are.
Come back next week. Be here with us. Stay with us because we'll go through it with you as best we can. Nobody can, you got the hard job but it's easier for the rest of us. But we could sure go with you. And like Alan said, you're not just a few of us who identify in our own stories with that level of self-condemnation. And that's what it is. It's condemnation. It's not criticism. Yeah. So I'm proud of you. I'm glad you're speaking up. This is good.
Yeah. And I just want to add, when they use that phrase, my best thinking got me here. Yeah, that's right. Your best thinking got you here. You may not have liked the path, but you're here tonight and you've been very vulnerable to this large group and looking for healing
But that's the thing that I guess I beat myself up. You know, I've been sober 7 years. In the last 3 years, life really got busy. And the last 12 months, my father was dying. And, you know, I just stopped really working my program properly and getting my thinking checked. And, you know, it took me about 3 months after I split up with my partner to realize that the last 3 years I've been under a huge amount of trauma and stress and pressure, and I haven't been able to think properly. I haven't been able to make a proper decision and I haven't had my own mind, you know, and it's just,
Don't think of it as having made a proper decision. You've been reactive. See, Adam,
yeah,
you've been reactive to life rather than responsive. And see, this is all it means is that you haven't developed emotional sobriety in your life. That's all
that's
this
right.
means. You've got a developmental delay here, and welcome to kindergarten. I mean, this is what we're all doing here on Thursday night, man. We're all in child development class, every one of us. That's all that tells you. That's all that it says the last 3 years. It doesn't say you're defective. It says that you did not develop the ability to learn how to respond to issues in your life. You were reactive. You were a nuclear reactor, just reacting left and right. And when we do that, is if you learn anything about the brain, the reactivity comes from the lower parts of the brain, not the higher parts. So you can't use judgment. You can't use abstract thought. You can't use anything that would help you. What we say is let the best of you do the talking and thinking for all of you. You can't do it when you're reactive. Only when you get into the pause. Only when you move into that area and you bring the temperature down and you calm things down, or what Bill calls quieting the storm. Is that how he says it? The stormy emotions, the stormy emotions. Only at that point can these other parts of my brain engage, and I can use some of the wisdom that I've been developing. You weren't able to do that, man. That's all. That's all this means. You got it?
Yeah.
All right.
You're a good man.
Thank you.